Vyacheslav Molotov and Lazar Kaganovich were an integral part of the Soviet leadership for almost 3 decades, from the 1920s to the early 1950s. Their names were always side by side on the lists of members of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the party, and their figures stood side by side on the podium of the mausoleum during parades. They were not just colleagues. They were cogs in a giant machine launched and controlled by Joseph Stalin. Their cooperation was based not on personal friendship, but on absolute devotion to the cause and the leader. One can imagine a night meeting in the Kremlin office. Thick tobacco smoke hangs under the low ceiling. Maps of industrial construction projects and lists written in small, neat handwriting are spread out on a huge table. Molotov, wearing his usual pince-nez, methodically and dispassionately reports figures, plans, and directives. He is the ideal bureaucrat, a man of function, capable of processing enormous amounts of information and turning it into clear resolutions of the Council of People's Commissars. Next to him is Kaganovich. Energetic, assertive, with a piercing gaze, he does not tolerate delays or half measures. If Molotov is the brain and nervous system of the apparatus, then Kaganovich is its steel muscles, ready to crush any obstacle in the way of its goal. Their styles were different, but their goal was the same, and while Stalin was alive, this system worked without any visible glitches, and any internal friction remained deeply hidden from prying eyes. If Soviet industrialization could be compared to a giant construction project, then Lazar Moiseyevich Kaganovich would undoubtedly have been its chief foreman. His name was known throughout the country. It was under his leadership that one of the most ambitious projects of the 1930s was completed, the construction of the Moscow Metro.
It was not just a transport facility. It was an underground palace for the people, a symbol of the power and achievements of the new state. Until 1955, the capital's underground system officially bore Kaganovich's name. But Kaganovich's energy was not only directed towards creation. He was the one whom the party sent to the most difficult and brutal areas of work. As one of the leaders, he was responsible for carrying out collectivization and dispossession of the kulaks in Ukraine and the North Caucasus, processes that were accompanied by mass deprivation and human tragedy. He was nicknamed the Iron Commissar when he headed the People's Commissariat of Transport. He brought order to the railways with ruthless determination, not stopping at mass purges among railway workers. For him, there were no impossible tasks, only saboteurs and enemies of the people who prevented their completion. He was a man of action, who demanded results at any cost. And this trait made him an indispensable and formidable figure in Stalin's system of government. While Kaganovich forged the country's industrial power in the fields and on construction sites, Vyacheslav Molotov ran the entire state machine from his Kremlin office. From 1930 to 1941, he held the post of chairman of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR, which was effectively equivalent to the position of head of government. For 11 years, all key decisions concerning the economy, industry, culture, the entire life of a huge country passed through his hands. He was known for his phenomenal work ethic, meticulousness, and ironclad commitment to party discipline. However, it was another role that brought him worldwide fame, that of the Soviet Union's chief diplomat.
As People's Commissar and then Minister of Foreign Affairs, Molotov became the face of Soviet foreign policy during the most tense years before and during the Second World War. His name went down in history thanks to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in August 1939. And of course, one cannot fail to mention the infamous incendiary mixture that Finnish soldiers during the Winter War ironically called the Molotov cocktail. His sphere of activity was different from that of Kaganovich. Quiet offices and meeting rooms instead of noisy construction sites. But his influence on the fate of the country was no less significant. But this coordinated work had another, much darker side. When the Great Terror began in the country, both Molotov and Kaganovich became its ruthless operators. Their signatures appear on thousands of so-called execution lists. However, even here their approaches differed, reflecting their natures. Molotov, as befitted a chief bureaucrat, worked with documents. He reviewed the lists submitted by the NKVD and made his decision. It was a conveyor belt, almost mechanical work of approving death sentences, devoid of personal emotions, but no less terrible for that. His participation was systematic, office-based. Kaganovich, on the other hand, acted differently. He was a man of the field. The party often sent him to the regions to strengthen local party organizations, which in practice meant carrying out a total purge. He came to Ivanovo, Chelyabinsk, and Donbass as a formidable auditor, after whose visit heads rolled. He personally spoke at party meetings, branded enemies of the people, and demanded decisive action from local security officers. If Molotov was a judge passing sentence in absentia, Kaganovich often resembled an inquisitor who was personally present at the trial and ensured that the sentence was carried out without fail. This difference in methods did not make one better than the other. Both were accomplices in the greatest tragedy. But it emphasized their roles. One was the strategist of terror, the other its tactician, its executor on the ground. Their personal relationships with Stalin were also complex and revealing. The leader valued both of them, but in different ways. He respected Molotov for his intelligence, diligence, and dogmatic loyalty. Stalin could afford to make sarcastic remarks to him, knowing that he would put up with anything. He is known to have said to Molotov, "You are not a people's commissar, you are a stone ass," hinting at his stubbornness and perseverance. But behind this rough familiarity lay trust. When Molotov's wife, Polina Zhemchuzhina, was arrested in 1949, Vyacheslav Mikhailovich underwent a terrible test of loyalty. At a Politburo meeting, he abstained from voting on her expulsion from the party, but then obeyed the majority decision and made no attempt to save her. He chose the party and the leader over his family. Stalin had a different relationship with Kaganovich. He saw him as an inexhaustible source of energy, a man capable of moving mountains and breaking any spine. Kaganovich was more emotional, more abrupt, and Stalin exploited these qualities. When Kaganovich's older brother, Mikhail, who held the post of People's Commissar of the Defense Industry, was repressed and shot, Lazar Moyazevich also did not dare to stand up for him. Like Molotov, he demonstrated absolute loyalty, proving that devotion to the leader was above blood ties. This shared tragedy, the willingness to sacrifice their closest loved ones for the sake of the system, made them not just comrades, but a kind of brothers in arms in the service of a single idol. Everything changed on 5th of March 1953. With Stalin's death, it was not just a regime that collapsed. It was the center of the universe around which all these people revolved. In the first hours after the leader's death, an invisible but desperate movement began in the corridors of the Kremlin. Old comrades in arms, who just yesterday had stood shoulder to shoulder at the deathbed, instantly turned into rivals. Molotov, as the oldest member of the Politburo and former head of government, undoubtedly considered himself one of the main heirs. He had enormous authority in the party, and his name was known throughout the world. He saw the country's future in a return to Leninist norms in his own Stalinist understanding, that is, to the collective leadership of the old guard. Kaganovich was no less influential in this new configuration. He had vast experience in managing key sectors of the national economy and wielded influence over the party apparatus in many regions. But unlike Molotov, he was more of a pragmatist than an ideologue. His main goal was to preserve his power and his place in the system. In this struggle for succession, their paths began to diverge. Initially, they found themselves in the same camp as Malenkov and Beria, trying to sideline the younger and seemingly less significant Nikita Khrushchev. However, this alliance was temporary and fragile. The first cracks in the monolith of the old guard appeared very soon. Khrushchev, having taken the post of first secretary of the Central Committee, began to cautiously but persistently promote his agenda. One of the first stumbling blocks was foreign policy. Molotov, who had returned to head the foreign ministry, categorically opposed the normalization of relations with Yugoslavia and its leader, Josip Broz Tito, whom he considered a revisionist and a traitor to the cause of communism. For Molotov, it was a matter of principle, a departure from Stalin's course. Khrushchev, on the contrary, saw it as an opportunity to strengthen the USSR's position in the world. Kaganovich took a wait-and-see position in this dispute, not wanting to enter into open conflict with either side. Another area of disagreement was domestic policy. Khrushchev's campaign to develop virgin lands, launched in 1954, was met with skepticism by Molotov. As an experienced manager, he considered this project to be a gamble, requiring enormous resources with no guarantee of success. He proposed focusing on increasing yields in already developed areas. Kaganovich, as a man of industrial progress, may have seen in the virgin lands something in keeping with the spirit of great construction projects, but even he viewed with apprehension Khrushchev's unilateral push for such large-scale decisions. The culmination of the hidden confrontation was the 20th Congress of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in February 1956, and Khrushchev's famous secret report on the cult of personality and its consequences. It was a blow of colossal force to everything Molotov and Kaganovich believed in and served. For Molotov, it was not only a betrayal of Stalin's memory, but also an undermining of the very foundations of the Soviet state. He was convinced that without strict centralized power and faith in the infallibility of the leader, the system would collapse. Kaganovich, although shocked by the report, behaved more flexibly. At the Congress itself, he did not openly criticize Khrushchev, trying to adapt to the new reality. But in his heart, like Molotov, he understood that the report was also a blow to them, as Stalin's closest associates. By 1957, the old guard's patience had run out. In their opinion, Khrushchev was leading the country to disaster. His arbitrary decisions in the economy, his flirting with the West, and, most importantly, his debunking of the cult of personality threatened the stability of the regime. It was then that Molotov, Kaganovich, and Malenkov, who had joined them, decided to act. They formed the core of the so-called anti-party group. Their goal was to remove Khrushchev from the post of First Secretary at a meeting of the Presidium of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. In June 1957, they struck. At the Presidium meeting, they sharply criticized Khrushchev, accusing him of adventurism and deviation from Leninist principles. Most members of the Presidium supported them. It seemed that Khrushchev's fate was sealed, but he turned out to be a more cunning and decisive politician than they had anticipated. He declared that only the plenum of the Central Committee could decide his fate. And, having secured the support of Defense Minister Marshal Zhukov, who organized the urgent delivery of Central Committee members to Moscow by military aircraft, he outmaneuvered his opponents. At the plenum of the Central Committee, which took place at the end of June, the situation changed dramatically. The members of the Central Committee, most of whom were Khrushchev's protégés, fully supported their leader. Molotov, Kaganovich, and Malenkov went from being accusers to defendants. Their speeches at the plenum became their political testament. Molotov behaved with dignity, firmly and stubbornly defending his convictions. He did not repent, but only asserted that he had acted in the interests of the party and the state. His speech was that of an unyielding dogmatist. Kaganovich, on the contrary, tried to maneuver, justify himself, and talk about his merits. His behavior showed more fear for his own fate than principled struggle. In this final public act of their duel, their characters were once again revealed. An unyielding ideologue and a pragmatic apparatchik, both of whom suffered a common defeat. The outcome was swift and humiliating. They were removed from the Presidium and the Central Committee, labeled an anti-party faction. This was the end of their political careers. For people who had been at the pinnacle of power for decades, it was tantamount to civil death. Molotov was sent as ambassador to Mongolia, an honorable exile for the former foreign minister of a great power. Kaganovich was appointed director of a small asbestos cement factory in the city of Asbest in the Urals. The iron-fisted People's Commissar, builder of the metro and ruler of the railways, ended his career in a modest administrative position. Their lives after power became the final, quiet act of this drama. Molotov, even after falling into disgrace and being expelled from the party in 1962, did not change his convictions. He lived in Zhukovka near Moscow, wrote endless letters to the Central Committee, and gave interviews to the writer Felix Chuev, in which he defended Stalin and his life's work until his last breath. He was like an old soldier who refuses to admit that the war is lost. In 1984, under Konstantin Chernenko, he was reinstated in the party, a symbolic gesture that was undoubtedly the most important thing for him. He died in 1986, having lived to see the beginning of perestroika, which he perceived as the final collapse of everything he had served. Kaganovich lived even longer, until 1991, dying just a few months before the collapse of the USSR. He lived in Moscow, in the famous House on the Embankment, like a living ghost of a bygone era. He also wrote his memoirs, but unlike Molotov, they contained more attempts at self-justification than a firm defense of the past. Until the end of his days, he feared that he would be held accountable for his participation in the repressions. Their duel, if there was one, ended in a draw. Both lost the battle for the future of the country. Both were swept away by the wave of history that they themselves had helped to raise. Their fates became a bitter lesson that even the most powerful figures, having lost the support of the system they served, become mere shadows of their former greatness. To understand the depth of their differences, it is worth looking at the very beginning of their paths. Vyacheslav Scriabin, who took the pseudonym Molotov, came from a family of clerks and was educated at a technical school. He was a classic intellectual revolutionary, a man of bookish culture, whose strength lay in doctrine and theory. His Marxism was gleaned from thick volumes and honed in party discussions. Lazar Kaganovich, on the contrary, was flesh and blood of the milieu that the party sought to elevate. Born into a poor Jewish family in a Ukrainian village, he worked as a shoemaker and a porter from a young age. His university was workers' meetings, strikes, and underground circles. He spoke the language of the masses, understood their needs, and knew how to inspire them with his rough but understandable energy. This difference in background and temperament determined their roles. Molotov became the chief ideologist and administrator, the man who translated the leader's will into laws and decrees. Kaganovich, on the other hand, was the executor, the battering ram who paved the way for these decrees in real life, regardless of the losses. Their administrative weight was also built on different foundations. Molotov's power was concentrated in the cold corridors of the Council of People's Commissars. He was a master of bureaucratic intrigue, a man who could drown any unwelcome project in a sea of approvals, or, conversely, give it the green light with a stroke of his pen. His strength lay in his knowledge of procedures, his control over document flow, and his ability to build a vertical structure of executive power. Kaganovich's power was different. It was field power. Stalin used him as his personal representative, as a crisis manager who was thrown into the most disastrous areas. Whether it was collectivization in Ukraine, restoring order in transport, or forcing the construction of heavy industry, Kaganovich arrived with extraordinary powers. He created his own temporary centers of power, subjugating local party and economic leaders, acting with brute force. He did not so much rule from his office as push through decisions on the spot, relying on his personal authority, fear, and Stalin's boundless trust. In a sense, Molotov was the prime minister, and Kaganovich was the king's personal emissary, whose power was above formal laws. This system of absolute loyalty was subjected to terrible tests. The story of the arrest of Polina Zhemchuzhina, Molotov's wife, is not just a family drama, but a political act of the highest order. Zhemchuzhina was a strong and independent woman, held the post of People's Commissar for the fishing industry, and had her own opinions. Her fatal mistake was a conversation with Israeli ambassador Golda Meir in 1948, in which she spoke too openly and proudly about her Jewish origins. In the atmosphere of the beginning struggle against rootless cosmopolitans, this was tantamount to a death sentence. Molotov's reaction to her arrest was a model of Stalinist discipline. At a Politburo meeting, he not only failed to defend his wife, but also voted for her expulsion from the party, abstaining only on the vote on her arrest. He sacrificed his love and family to prove his unwavering loyalty to the system. The fate of Mikhail Kaganovich, Lazar's older brother, was no less tragic. As People's Commissar of the aviation industry, he was accused of sabotage. According to the official version, he shot himself in his office without waiting for arrest. Lazar Kaganovich, like Molotov, did nothing to save his brother. These personal tragedies, endured in silence, became a terrible price for them to pay, for their position at the top of power, and finally cemented them into Stalin's system as its integral elements. The dispute over virgin lands was deeper than a simple difference of opinion on agricultural technology. For Molotov, as a conservative statesman, it was a violation of economic balance. He believed that it was necessary to invest in existing agricultural areas in the non-Chernozem zone to improve farming practices, rather than squandering enormous resources on a risky project with an unpredictable climate. This reflected his systematic, planned approach. Kaganovich, although he did not object openly, saw this as a manifestation of Khrushchev's voluntarism, when a single personal decision, not fully thought through, was given priority. For both of them, accustomed to Stalin's system of collective discussion, albeit formal, and approval by the leader, Khrushchev's unilateral pressure was a violation of all the rules of the game. Even more acute was the issue of expanding the rights of the Union republics and creating sovnarkhozes, which destroyed the centralized economic management system they had built. Molotov saw this as a threat to the disintegration of the unified national economic complex, and Kaganovich saw it as undermining the power of the central ministries, which he himself had created. At that very June 1957 plenum, which decided their fate, not only political, but also personal accusations were leveled against them. They were called dogmatists and bookkeepers, people detached from life, who did not see the real needs of the people and clung to outdated Stalinist methods. Khrushchev and his supporters skillfully contrasted themselves with them as innovators seeking new paths, and branded the anti-party group as conservatives, holding the country back. Molotov was reminded of his position on Yugoslavia, Malenkov of his responsibility for the Leningrad affair, and Kaganovich of his cruelty in carrying out repressions. This was not just a political discussion, but a public flogging designed to morally destroy opponents. The outcome of the plenum was decided not by the strength of arguments, but by the balance of power. Khrushchev, relying on the party apparatus and the security forces in the person of Zhukov, who directly stated that the army is against this decision to remove Khrushchev and will not allow it, demonstrated that he now held real power. Molotov and Kaganovich, accustomed to backroom intrigues, were powerless against this pressure. In exile, their paths diverged completely. Molotov turned his dacha in Zhukovka into a kind of memorial to the Stalin era. He lived in the past, rereading Lenin and Stalin, keeping detailed diaries. His many hours of conversation with Felix Chuev, which formed the basis of the book 140 Conversations with Molotov, became his political legacy. In them, he appears as a man absolutely convinced of his own righteousness, unrepentant of anything. He justified the repressions as a historical necessity, admired Stalin as the greatest genius, and spoke with contempt of Khrushchev and subsequent leaders. It was an intellectual and moral position, monstrous to many but consistent. Kaganovich, on the other hand, chose a different tactic: oblivion and silence. He lived a quiet life as a pensioner, avoided journalists, and in his memoirs, which were never published during his lifetime, he tried to smooth over the rough edges and present himself as merely a faithful executor of the party's will. There is a story about how, once in the 1980s, an elderly man approached him in an alley and, recognizing him, hissed with hatred, "Executioner." Kaganovich turned pale and hurried to hide in the doorway. He feared the judgment of history, while Molotov himself challenged history to judgment, confident that it would vindicate him. In this final, unspoken confrontation, the unyieldingness of one and the attempt to adapt of the other, the essence of their never-realized open duel was revealed. Their working methods were polar opposites, like the two poles of a cruel planet. If a problem arose, Molotov demanded a memorandum, set up a commission, and prepared a draft resolution. He believed in the power of paper, in the inevitability of directives. Kaganovich, on the other hand, believed in the power of personal presence and shouting. There is a legend about how, at one of the meetings on transport accidents, he slammed his fist on the table and roared his famous phrase, "Every accident has a name, a surname, and a patronymic." He immediately went to the scene, staged a show trial, and the guilty parties, real or imagined, were immediately stripped of their posts, or even their lives. Molotov managed the system while Kaganovich constantly broke it, acting as an emergency commissioner. One can only imagine the deep irritation caused to the methodical head of government by this firefighter, whose attacks disrupted all planned calculations and created chaos that his apparatus then had to clean up. The national question drew a special, invisible line of tension between them. In the last years of Stalin's life, when the case of the Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee was unfolding and the doctor's case was being prepared, Kaganovich's position as the highest-ranking Jew in the country became extremely vulnerable. In order to survive, he had to demonstrate ostentatious, excessive loyalty, to be holier than the Pope in matters of combating Zionism and cosmopolitanism. At the same time, Molotov, whose beloved wife Paulina Zhemchuzhina was Jewish and had already been exiled on precisely these charges, was under enormous personal pressure. This situation created a wall of silent mistrust between them. Each saw the other as a potential threat. Kaganovich saw Molotov as a secret protector of the Zionists because of his wife, while Molotov saw Kaganovich as a man who could betray their common interests at any moment for his own salvation, lashing out with redoubled fury at those associated with his disgraced nationality. Even their lifestyles and habits reflected this difference. Molotov was an ascetic, a dry stick, a man of the office whose life was governed by a schedule. His only passion was work. Kaganovich, on the contrary, was a more lively, down-to-earth person. He loved feasts, could afford to use harsh words, was more emotional and open in expressing both anger and affection. Within the narrow circle of Stalin's associates, these differences inevitably led to friction. Their interaction in the Politburo can be compared to the work of two different alloys in the same mechanism. One is hard but brittle. The other is more viscous but capable of withstanding enormous loads. While the chief designer, Stalin, was alive, he skillfully used the properties of both, preventing them from colliding in a destructive way. But as soon as he was gone, these internal tensions immediately made themselves felt, becoming one of the driving forces behind the ensuing struggle for power. The secret duel between Molotov and Kaganovich will probably remain a myth based on their complex relationship and role in key events. Their cooperation and disagreements were part of a broader struggle for power in the USSR, and understanding these facts helps dispel illusions, reminding us that history is often shaped by collective